Welcome to African Folktales by Mazi. Before we open the scrolls of today's shocking chronicle, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where you are watching from in the comments section below. We love seeing our community grow from every corner of the world. In the land of our ancestors, it is said that the sun does not wait for the tortoise, and the river does not flow backward to find a lost leaf. We are taught from birth that the hands that do not work should not taste the sweetness of the soup. But what happens when a child refuses to even lift a spoon? What happens when a mother's love becomes a shroud that hides a terrifying secret? Today, I bring you the story of Eber, the girl who was known as the lazy shadow dot in a village of farmers and grinders. Eber sat still. While other girls carried water, she stared at the walls. Her mother, Monkechi, treated her like a newborn babe, bathing her, feeding her, and shielding her from the sun. The villagers whispered of a curse, but the truth was far more shocking than any ghost story. Gather round, for this is the legend of the laziest girl in the village. In the vibrant village of Umwogu, work was the heartbeat of the land. From the moment the first rooster crowed, the air was filled with the sound of hoes hitting the earth and the rhythmic thumping of pestles in mortar. To be idle in Umwogu was to be a ghost among the living. Every child knew their place, the boys in the yam fields and the girls at the stream. But in the small, neatly swept compound of Monkechi, time seemed to stand still. Her only daughter, Eber, was 18 years old, with skin as smooth as polished mahogany and eyes that held the stillness of a deep well. However, Eber did nothing. She did not sweep the floor. She did not fetch water. She did not even tie her own wrapper. While other girls her age returned from the market with heavy baskets balanced on their heads, Eber sat on a low, wooden stool under the shade of the udara tree, watching the world go by with a blank expression. The village girls, led by the sharp Damaka, would often pass by and giggle. Look at the queen of idleness. They would whisper, she is waiting for the wind to breathe for her. But Eber never blinked. She lived in a cocoon of silence, a mystery that the village could not solve. She was the talk of every hearth, the example mothers used to warn their daughters do not become like Eber, or no man will ever bring wine to your father's house. The strangest part of Eber's life was not her idleness, but the devotion of her mother, Monkechi. Monkechi was a widow who worked 3 jobs to keep their home running. She sold roasted corn by the roadside, she weeded the farms of the wealthy, and she wove mats late into the night. Yet, despite her exhaustion, she treated Eber like a delicate porcelain doll. Every morning, the neighbors would watch through the gaps in the bamboo fence as Monkechi led Eber to the bathing hut. There, the mother would scrub her daughter's skin with black soap and a sponge, rinsing her with warm water as if she were a 3-year-old child. She would then dry her with a soft cloth, rub her skin with fragrant palm kernel oil, and dress her in the finest lace. She even combed Eber's hair, braiding it into intricate patterns that glistened in the sun. When it was time to eat, Monkechi would sit Eber down and hand-feed her balls of fufu dipped in a juicy soup. Eber would open her mouth obediently, chew slowly, and swallow, never uttering a single word of thanks. The village elders shook their heads in disapproval. Monkechi is breeding a monster. The oldest man, Ogbufi, is Equisili. Remark at a child who is pampered like a goddess will grow up to be a demon to her husband. But Monkechi ignored them all, her face a mask of fierce, protective love. The whispers turned into open mockery during the New Yam Festival. This was the time when the young women of Umwogu performed the traditional dance to welcome the harvest. It was a display of strength, grace, and vitality. Every girl in the village participated, wearing beads around their waists and painting their bodies with yuli. But Eber was absent. She sat on her usual stool, dressed in a heavy velvet gown that seemed to warm for the afternoon sun. Amaka and her friends stopped their dancing right in front of Monkechi's compound. They shook their hips and sang a song they had composed just for Eber. Oh, the girl who cannot lift a finger, her mother washes her feet. Oh, the girl who cannot cook a grain, her mother feeds her meat. When the mother dies, who will wash the queen? The vultures will come to keep her clean. The crowd roared with laughter. Monkechi stepped out of her hut, a kitchen knife in her hand, her eyes burning with a terrifying rage. Leave my daughter alone, she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. You know nothing of the burden we carry. Go back to your dancing and leave the quiet ones in peace. The girls ran away, laughing, but the incident left a bitter taste in the village's mouth. They began to call Eber the lazy curse, believing that her presence would bring bad luck to the harvest. As the weeks passed, a dark cloud seemed to settle over Monkechi's house. The mother was growing thinner, her eyes sinking into her skull from the weight of her labor. She was working harder than ever to provide for Eber, who remained as motionless as a statue. One evening, a wealthy suitor from the neighboring village, a man named Chief Obina, came to inquire about Eber. He had heard stories of her legendary beauty and her strange silence. He arrived with 2 kegs of palm wine and a basket of kola nuts. "I have enough servants to work for 10 lifetimes," the chief said to Monkechi. "I do not need a wife who can farm or cook. I want a jewel to sit in my palace. Let me take Eber as my 3rd wife." Monkechi looked at the chief, then at her daughter, who was staring at a moth fluttering near the lamp. For a moment, it seemed she would accept, but then her face hardened. "My daughter is not for sale," she said coldly, "and she is not a jewel to be kept in a box. You may take your wine and leave." The chief was insulted. He stood up, spilling some of the wine on the floor. "You are a fool, woman. You are dying to serve a girl who does not love you. When you are gone, she will rot in this hut, and nobody will lift a finger to bury her." He stormed out, leaving the house in a heavy, suffocating silence. The turning point came during the great drought. The rains refused to fall, and the river Umu grew shallow and muddy. The crops withered in the fields, and hunger began to gnaw at the bellies of the villagers. Strength was now the only currency. Those who could walk long distances to the distant spring survived. Those who were weak suffered. Monkechi fell ill. The years of overworking and skipping meals finally caught up with her. She lay on her mat, her skin hot with fever, her breath coming in ragged gasps. For the first time, Eber was alone. There was nobody to bathe her, nobody to feed her, and nobody to protect her from the prying eyes of the village. The neighbors watched, expecting Eber to waste away or cry for help. But Eber did neither. She sat by her mother's side, her eyes fixed on the dying woman's face. On the 3rd day of the fever, the water pot in the corner of the room went dry. Monkechi moaned, her cracked lips whispering the word water. Eber stood up. It was the first time many had seen her stand without her mother's assistance. She picked up the heavy clay pot, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked out of the hut and toward the village square. The villagers stopped what they were doing, their mouths agape. "The lazy queen is walking," someone shouted. But Eber did not stop. She walked past the square, past the market, and toward the forbidden path that led to the Cave of Whispers. The Cave of Whispers was a place no sane villager visited. It was said to be the home of the ancient spirits, and the water that dripped from its ceiling was the only pure water left in the land during a drought. But the path was steep, rocky, and guarded by thorns that could tear a man's flesh to the bone. Eber climbed. She did not cry when the thorns cut her legs. She did not stumble when the rocks bruised her feet. She moved with a strange, rhythmic grace, as if she were being pulled by an invisible string. Behind her, a group of curious villagers, including Amaka and Baba Sigan, followed at a distance, wanting to see where the laziest girl was going. When Eber reached the mouth of the cave, she did something that made the onlookers gasp. She began to sing. Her voice was not weak. It was a powerful, haunting melody that echoed through the hills. As she sang, she reached behind her back and unzipped the velvet dress she had worn for years. The dress fell to the ground, and for the first time, the village saw the shocking truth. Eber's back was covered in a series of intricate, glowing symbols carved into her skin. They were the marks of the Weaver, an ancient and forbidden lineage of seers who were burdened with the weight of the village's collective sins. The laziness was not idleness. It was a state of constant, agonizing meditation. To keep the symbols from burning her skin and the village from descending into chaos, Eber had to remain perfectly still. Every movement she made was like walking through fire. Her mother had bathed her and fed her not out of pity, but to keep the weaver's blood cool. The velvet dress had been lined with special herbs to dampen the glow of the marks. As Eber stood at the cave entrance, the symbols on her back pulsed with a brilliant blue light. She dipped the clay pot into the crystal pool inside the cave, and the water began to hum. She turned back to the villagers, her eyes now glowing with the same blue fire. "My mother gave her life to keep the fire in my blood from burning you all," Eber said, her voice sounding like 1,000 rushing rivers. "You called me lazy while I carried the weight of your greed, your lies, and your hate on my skin." The villagers fell to their knees, trembling with fear and shame. Amaka hid her face in her hands, weeping for the song she had sung. Eber walked back down the mountain, the heavy pot of water balanced perfectly on her head. She did not look at them. She went straight to her hut and gave the water to her mother. The moment the water touched Monkechi's lips, the fever broke. But the secret was out. The village priest, a man who had long forgotten the ancient ways, arrived at the compound with his acolytes. "This girl is a witch," he proclaimed, though his voice trembled. "She carries the marks of the forbidden ones. We must exile her before the spirits take their revenge on Umwogu." But the villagers, led by the now humbled Ogbufius Equisili, stood in his way. "She is no witch," the old man said. "She is the one who has been thirsty so we could drink. We have been blind, but now we see." For the next few days, the village transformed. They no longer mocked Monkechi's house. They brought gifts of yams, fish, and oil. They built a canopy of cool leaves over the compound to help Eber manage the heat of her marks. Eber no longer sat under the Udara tree in silence. She began to speak to the elders, telling them of the visions she saw in her stillness, visions of coming rains, of hidden wells, and of the need for the village to heal its broken heart. The laziness was now understood as a sacrifice, a sacred duty that required more strength than any farmer could ever imagine. The drought did not end immediately, but the spirit of Umwogu changed. People began to work together, sharing their meager resources and looking after the elderly. Monkechi regained her strength, but she no longer had to work 3 jobs. The village took care of her, honoring her as the guardian of the weaver. Eber remained the center of their spiritual life. She still required daily baths in herbal water to keep the marks from burning, but now, the young women of the village, including a repentant Amaka, competed for the honor of assisting her. They realized that by washing Eber, they were washing away their own arrogance. One afternoon, as the first dark clouds finally gathered in the sky, Eber stood in the center of the yard. She raised her hands, and the symbols on her back glowed one last time. A massive thunderclap shook the earth, and the rain began to fall in torrents. It wasn't just water. It felt like a blessing that washed away the dust of years of misunderstanding. The village danced in the rain, and for the first time, Eber danced with them slowly, painfully, but with a smile that outshone the sun. The story of the laziest girl became a legend that was passed down through generations. Mothers no longer used Eber as a warning of idleness. They used her as a lesson in hidden burdens. They taught their children that you never truly know the weight another person is carrying. Yard 42 and Umwogu were different places, but they shared the same truth, that what looks like a flaw is often a shield, and what looks like a burden is often a gift. Monkechi lived to a ripe old age, always sitting by her daughter's side, proud of the girl she had bathed like a child. Eber remained the weaver of Umwogu, the quiet girl who held the world together by standing still. And every time the rains fall on the village, the people remember the girl who was too lazy to let her village perish. They remember that sometimes the greatest work is done in the silence of the heart. Eber climbed the mountain. She did not cry when the thorns cut her legs. She did not stumble when the rocks bruised her feet. She moved with a strange, rhythmic grace, as if she were being pulled by an invisible string. Behind her, a group of curious villagers, including Amaka and the elderly Baba Sigan, followed at a distance. They watched in awe as the girl, who usually needed help to stand, now scaled the dangerous cliffs of the Cave of Whispers with the agility of a mountain goat. The air grew cold, and the wind began to howl, but Eber did not falter. She was a girl possessed by a purpose that none of them could yet comprehend. Her eyes fixed on the peak with a terrifying focus that silenced even the loudest scoffers in the crowd. When she reached the mouth of the cave, Eber did something that made the onlookers gasp and pull back in fear. She began to sing. Her voice was not the weak whisper they expected. It was a powerful, haunting melody that seemed to vibrate the very stones of the mountain. As she sang, she reached behind her back and unzipped the heavy velvet dress she had worn for years. The fabric fell to the rocky ground, and for the first time, the village saw the shocking truth. Eber's back was not smooth. It was covered in intricate, glowing symbols carved into her skin, marks of the weaver. The light from her skin was so bright that it illuminated the dark mouth of the cave, turning the shadows into dancing ghosts of blue and gold. The laziness was never idleness. It was a state of constant, agonizing meditation. To keep the symbols from burning her skin and the village from descending into chaos, Eber had to remain perfectly still. Every movement she made in her daily life was like walking through a furnace of fire. Her mother, Monkechi, had bathed her and fed her not out of pity, but to keep the weaver's blood cool and the symbols dormant. The velvet dress had been lined with ancient herbs to dampen the glow and protect the villagers from the raw power radiating from her spine. Eber was not a lazy girl. She was a living sacrifice, a silent guardian holding back a spiritual storm that would have swallowed Umwogu years ago. "My mother gave her life to keep the fire in my blood from burning you all," Eber said, her voice echoing like 1,000 rushing rivers. She turned to face the villagers, her eyes now glowing with a brilliant blue fire that matched the marks on her back. "You called me a curse while I carried the weight of your greed, your lies, and your bitterness on my own skin so that the land would stay fertile." The villagers fell to their knees, trembling with a mixture of terror and deep shame. Amaka hid her face in her hands, weeping for every cruel song she had ever sung against the girl who was currently saving their lives with every breath she took. Eber turned back to the cave and dipped the clay pot into the crystal pool that sat at the heart of the mountain. The water began to hum and glow with a celestial light. She walked back down the steep path, the heavy pot balanced perfectly on her head, her steps now firm and authoritative. She did not look at the people who had mocked her for 18 years. She went straight to her hut and gave the water to her mother. The moment the sacred liquid touched Monkechi's parched lips, the fever broke instantly, and the mother's eyes opened to see her daughter standing tall and radiant. No longer a child in need of bathing, but a woman in full command of her destiny. But as word of the glow spread, the village priest, a man whose heart had grown hard with pride and a thirst for control, arrived at the compound. He feared his own loss of power in the face of such ancient magic. "This girl is a witch," he proclaimed to the gathering crowd, his voice shaking with false righteousness. "She carries forbidden marks that will bring the wrath of the ancestors upon Umwogu. We must exile her tonight." He raised his staff to strike her, but the villagers, led by the now humbled Ogbufi Ezekwesili, formed a human wall around the hut. "She is no witch," the old man declared. "She is the one who has been thirsty so we could drink. You will not touch her or her mother." The village of Umwogu transformed in the days that followed. They no longer mocked Monkechi. Instead, they brought the finest yams, fresh palm oil, and dried fish to her doorstep. They built a canopy of cool plantain leaves over the entire compound to help Eber manage the intense heat that radiated from her marks. The young women who once laughed at her now sat at her feet in silence. Learning the importance of internal strength and observation, Eber began to speak to the elders, sharing visions of the earth's hidden veins of water and the secrets of the soil that had been forgotten by the modern farmers. She became the heartbeat of the village, a quiet guide who led them through the dark. The laziness was now understood as a sacred duty, a heavy burden that required more internal strength than any physical labor in the fields. The villagers realized that, while they worked with their hands, Eber worked with her soul, filtering the spiritual impurities of the land through her own body. One afternoon, as the horizon turned a bruised purple and the air grew heavy with the scent of approaching rain, Eber stepped into the center of the village square. She closed her eyes, and the symbols on her back pulsed with a light so bright it could be seen through her clothing. She was calling the sky, negotiating with the clouds for the life of her people. Her spirit reaching into the heavens, a massive thunderclap shook the foundations of every hut in Umwogu. The sky opened, and the rain began to fall in a drizzle, but in a life-giving torrent that filled the dry wells and washed away the rot. It was a rain that smelled of ancient honey and fresh earth. Months passed, and the village flourished like never before. The yams grew larger than human heads, and the goats birthed triplets, but with prosperity came the envy of the neighboring Igbo tribe. They had heard of the Glow Girl and believed that if they captured her, they could steal the luck of Umwogu for themselves. They gathered their warriors under the cover of a moonless night, intending to snatch Eber from her bed and burn the compound to the ground. They moved like shadows through the tall grass, their spears coated in poison, confident that the lazy girl and her tired mother would be easy prey in the dead of night. But Eber did not sleep like ordinary people. Even in rest, her spirit was connected to the very boundaries of the village. She felt the snap of a twig a mile away. She heard the whispered breath of the enemy warriors. Without leaving her mat, she sent a mental signal to the village hunters, her marks glowing a warning red. The hunters, who now respected Eber as their spiritual general, moved into position before the first Igbo warrior could cross the gate. The ambush was turned on its head. The raiders found themselves surrounded by the men of Umwogu, who fought with a ferocity born of their newfound unity and the knowledge that they were protecting their living miracle. When the Igloo leader broke through to Eber's room, he found her sitting perfectly still on her stool, her mother standing bravely behind her. He raised his blade to strike, but Eber simply opened her eyes. The symbols on her back flared with such intensity that the small room became as bright as the midday sun. The warrior was blinded by the pure, righteous light, his eyes burning with the force of her purity. He dropped his weapon and fell to the ground, crying out for mercy. Eber did not strike him. She simply told him to go back to his people and tell them that Umwogu was no longer a village of divided hearts, but a fortress of light that would never fall. The victory over the raiders brought a permanent peace to the region. The neighboring tribes realized that Umwogu was protected by a force they could not understand and a girl they could not defeat. Monkechi became the most respected woman in the land, the mother of the weaver. She no longer had to weave mats until her fingers bled. She was cared for by a village that finally understood the price she had paid in silence. Eber continued to guide the village through every season, her idleness remaining the spiritual anchor that kept the community grounded. She was the teacher of patience, the mistress of peace, and the living heart of the village's prosperity. As Eber grew older, the symbols on her back began to fade. Their work nearly complete, as the village had finally learned to live in harmony. She called for a young girl in the Laziest child who had been born with the same stillness and the same deep, searching eyes. In a secret ceremony at the Cave of Whispers, Eber passed the burden and the gift to the next generation. The cycle of the weaver would continue, ensuring that Umwogu would always have a silent guardian. Monkechi's sacrifice was never forgotten, and a statue of a mother bathing her child was built in the square. A reminder that the greatest strength is often hidden in the simplest acts of love. Today, the compound of Monkechi is a place of pilgrimage for those seeking wisdom. The Udara tree still stands, its fruit sweeter than any other in the land, flourishing under the legacy of the girl who sat beneath it. The elders still tell the story of the girl who was called lazy but carried the spiritual weight of 1,000 souls on her back. They teach their children to look closely at those who are quiet, for they may be the ones holding the sky in place while the rest of the world sleeps. The legend of Eber remains a testament to the power of hidden sacrifice, proving forever that the most powerful hands are sometimes the ones that appear to be doing nothing at all. And so, the story ends. Remember, hands that work feed the belly, but the heart that stays still feeds the soul. I am Mazi, and this has been an African folktale. Tell us in the comments, have you ever misjudged someone only to find out they were fighting a battle you knew nothing about? Until we meet again under the mango tree. Stay wise. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.